Okay, we're good. All right. Just start like we usually do. Would the two of you mind giving a brief update of sort of where you are in terms of working with a mentor, mentee, things with your classes, things like that? Greg, why don't you go first?
Okay. So yeah, I guess officially my fellowship is over in terms of, we had our 9 months and we met a bunch of times and it was great. Um, uh, so I've moved my class forward. I think what I still need to do for, Palm purposes to check the right boxes is I need to get a videotaped version of my class now, the post Palm. What does my class look like now? And I need to present at a conference about Palm stuff. I was trying to get to SACNAS, but they rejected our proposal. So we're gonna go elsewhere. Specifically, the American Physiological Society Institute on Teaching and Learning next June in Minnesota. So I'll be
Oh,
doing.
sounds good.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, and I think
I
I'll
imagine
actually meet
I
Sue
imagine
that
a
way.
lot of people didn't get into SACNEST since it was in Hawaii and all. But
Yeah, yeah, I can see the appeal, but
yeah.
so I think that's where I am.
Okay. And what kind of classes, remind me, have you been working on?
Well, the proposal was for human anatomy in
Mhm.
particular to mostly pre-nursing students. So that's officially the place of intervention. Although I teach human physiology at the same time to similar students, so I'm really trying to do things for both. So, for example, clickers, I got started with that, and I'm using them now in both classes.
Okay, very cool. I mean, it's definite that we want to see the stuff that you learn sort of get applied across everything you do and maybe to even other people that you work with. That's very
Right.
exciting.
Yeah.
Carlos, how's life in Raleigh?
Life in Raleigh is busy but good. um, I just got out of one of the classes I'm teaching, and I, it's that part of the semester where now I know the students and getting them to interact and group work's going okay, and we're doing clicker questions, and they are thinking and pairing and actually sharing. Uh, and then we have 3 weeks left.
Yeah.
And everyone's worried about lab reports and final exams. But for the class that I'm implementing some of the things that we're doing in Palm. Uh, it's going well, I think. Um, we're trying some group annotations and group class notes and summaries, and some people are buying into it. Some people are still struggling, and we have a couple more assignments to go, and we'll see how that goes.
And how big are these classes? If you remind me.
So the one I'm doing these activities in, I have 15.
Okay.
It's capped at 16, and one person left us after week 1.
Cool. I just wasn't sure. I mean, given the size of your institution, if you were working with a large lecture class, or if this is a confined.
I'm lucky. This is a lucky in one sense. This is an upper level uh, lab and lecture class with uh, so it and they put me in a hybrid space, so it's kind of weird but fun because it's basically lecture sessions in a lab.
Oh, wow.
So that has been fun.
Well, what an excellent transition to our topic today.
Spaces,
Yeah,
right?
almost like you planned that. Um,
No.
what considerations should we make to the physical spaces that we're doing the teaching in? And this is something, it's actually really interesting. I had looked at where this was done, and I actually have a colleague on another project who's interested in this kind of stuff, like physical interventions, and he was at Michigan State, and this is at Michigan State. So I'm wondering if this isn't one of the preeminent places where they do this kind of consideration. I don't know. But basically, what you're asking here is anecdotally, does the type of classroom in which we do this kind of work matter? And the results are interesting. It doesn't come out as robustly and strongly as we assume it will with respect to there being a huge relevance, shall we say, to how your room is set up. So I think the primary thing I want to talk about today is your reaction to that and maybe how you set up your own classes. And Carlos, I might pick on you first because you're talking about this space that is built for one thing, but you're using it for something else.
Yeah. So we have in the biotechnology program, we're on the 6th floor of the penthouse of the building, and we're actually college independent. So I'm in the College of Natural Resources building, but we're really not part of their thing.
Okay.
And we have one classroom that when I came in as a teaching postdoc, I had the chance to do something really cool. And I'm not sure how I got away with this, but we had a lecture space that was basically theater seating and tables all facing a wall with on what would be my left windows facing outside and sunny Raleigh outside. And my first year and a half as a postdoc, I was like jumping around in front of the big screen, and everyone was staring outside at the clouds, which may have been the content, may have been the weather, or may have been the instructor, most likely. But we had the opportunity to redesign that class, and what we did, we changed the focal area to another wall with a big smart board, 2 screens on the sides, their backs toward the window, and we made we put movable tables, and that has just changed the dynamics because I can tell them, work with your groups or turn around and find another partner or wheel around, and just not having the fixed seating has been fantastic. And in the lab, while I still have the same setup of actually in this hybrid lab space, we have one smart board, 2 LCD displays on the sides. It's still, they are confined by the benches. So I can't really have them working in the bigger groups that we do in the classroom. So because even though they have movable stools, they can't really circulate because there's a bench. So that I've felt it this semester because I haven't been able to do some of the group activities, and I've been trying to use a random number generator to generate random groups, which has been fun. That's I learned from a teaching postdoc here who tried it last semester, and I'm like, that's cool. I want to try that. But the physical space really plays a role. I'm still able to do poll everywhere and get that going and get that interaction, but having benches and being in the lab space has confined me to not the small groups that we were using in the classroom. But I don't think it has, I buy into the paper, and I don't think it has affected learning because we're still doing Google Docs for interactive documents, and we're still annotating with something that's on the web. So they still have access to it. So
yeah, so is it a question then of the spaces being something that is accentuating the learning, but not necessarily, what's the phrase we always use? Necessary but not sufficient, or sufficient but not necessary?
Right. I'm
sufficient
kind
but
of
not necessary, that's the one I mean. Yeah.
I'm kind of inclined to say that. It's more of the instructor, like on Thursday, I had a random number generator set up, and I was going to had them look at 3 different softwares, and they were going to, random groups of 4 or 5 were going to create little summaries of what the software 3 questions. What does the software do? How can it be implemented? And is it free? And I made this random group assignment, and then I turned around and everybody looked confused because all the people were in different spots of the room. And finally I said, just work with your base, work with your tables. But still, they did the same thing. They worked on the same assignment.
It's funny because when I'm sitting, this is a secondary office I have in our undergraduate research center, which we just built, and there's these classrooms I'm actually staring out at right now that have 2 glass walls, one of which faces outside, and the other, oh, Sue's joining us. How you doing? One of which faces the exterior, and the other which faces the lobby that we have. And what you were describing about distraction is something I definitely can relate to. That you watch these classes going in there, and it's a lovely looking space, but then like every time someone walks by anywhere, everyone's just like going like this and going like this.
Yeah.
It'd be very hard to keep attention to any sense.
And even the instructor gets distracted. But
Oh, sure.
now that I face the window, once in a while I find myself looking out there going, oh, and good, let's go back.
Yeah. So it's like, it's funny how any one little anecdotal change there can actually make a difference that maybe isn't quantified in numbers like you see in the paper, but you can tangibly see seems to be making a difference in your particular class.
Yep.
Greg, how about you?
Sorry, how about me in terms of
Your experience, sort of a 2-part question, your experience with the spaces on your own campus and your take on the paper sort of minimizing the effects of the space.
Okay, yeah, so we have classrooms, at least the ones that I have taught in, are not horrible for active learning. So the chairs are generally movable, the seating can be adjusted somewhat. So I'm, community college, we aren't going to spend $100,000 renovating a room to make it more active learning compatible, but what we have is fine. It's all right. For lecture and lab, our lab setup is, again, that's not too bad. In terms of the paper, I guess I don't know, maybe I'm getting too cynical when I read these, but I'm sort of never surprised when I see a lack of an effect. It looked like they really did it super carefully, controlled for a lot of things, tried to compare the 2 different sections as best they could. But I sort of, my overall thinking on this was sort of like, so I think with a super committed instructor who's very skilled at implementing active learning, I think we can imagine that instructor can kind of make it work wherever, right? And so for that instructor, maybe having a special room isn't so essential or so much of an advantage. I found myself wondering, for more novice instructors who are kind of open to active learning but aren't as good at it, would the room be most impactful for them, where they need that little boost of like making it seem extra easy and extra fun? They can circulate around without feeling weird about it. So I'm sort of, that's my question, is would be most helpful to the non-expert instructor attempting to teach with active learning for the first or second or third time?
It's an interesting perspective because we've probably all seen people that always make this kind of thing look effortless, right? And for those type of instructors, maybe the room doesn't make any bit of difference. Whereas if we were to concentrate on beginners, maybe we do see something more tangible. I hadn't actually thought about it that way.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So,
go ahead.
But it does seem like almost like an economics paper, right? As much as anything else. Do we really want to spend this money?
Yes.
classrooms. And I mean, I'm glad they took a hard look at that question and said, yeah, maybe we can't as easily justify these expenses as we thought. So I appreciate it. It felt like honesty to me.
So it's a cost-benefit analysis in essence.
Yeah.
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 I found it really interesting. They're talking about what I would consider really small classes.
Mhm.
And I realize that's totally a function of where I am and where other people are. But if there are only a maximum of 72 in a room, I think even in a lecture theater, 72 is small enough that the kind of interaction that you can attain there, the room really doesn't matter. I think once you get up to 300 or so, you might start to see a big difference. Well, I'm not sure I'd want to be in a scale-up classroom of 300, but
Yes.
let's take the maybe double the size of the two different sections that they were comparing, 49 versus 61.
Yeah.
I think if you started looking at 100 and 120, then I guess my personal experience is it would start to feel different. Though it is absolutely true. I know people who can achieve wonderful active learning in a room of 1,000, you know. The folks at the University of Washington, Scott Freeman being one of them, Mary Pat Wendroth being another. I mean, they're just unbelievably skilled at pulling students into activity, no matter where they are.
So once again, another question then may be, if this was looked at from the perspective of class size, in addition to what they're looking at, you might get a more dramatic effect on results. Fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Sue, I might want to ask if you could give us some perspective on the rooms that you guys have built at Minnesota, with respect to how were they, what was the inspiration for that design?
Larry Michelson,
Mm-hmm.
who was the person who I think came up with the terminology of scale up. And he insisted that tables of 9 were the way to go. That does conflict with things that I learned way back in high school and looking at size of a group that's optimal for communication. And typically, I think that's considered to be more like 5 to 7 max. The nice
Is that
thing
colloquial term that if you go to dinner with 8 people, it'll split into 2 groups of 4 inevitably or something like that?
Yeah. The nice thing about the 9-person tables is that they do easily allow you to have either 2 groups of 4 or 5 or 3 groups of 3. And the 3 groups of 3 is particularly useful, I think, because you can design work for students that requires each of the 3 people to have a job.
And then the groups can sort of cross collaborate if they want,
Yeah.
if you can get 3 groups in one sitting.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
And you can actually have a jigsaw exercise internal to a table that each of those 3 groups of 3 has one specific thing that they're responsible for in whatever you're doing that day. And then each of the 3 groups puts their information together to synthesize some total project, final decision, final conclusion.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that, I feel like there's not too much to say on the content of the paper beyond sort of what it tries to say and how it sort of jives with our own, I would almost say anecdotal experiences, but I know it's not a particularly rigorous way of talking about it. But I know for ourselves, we had a room that was set up for risers, introductory lecture, things like that. And when we actually had some donations a few years ago, we were able to knock those out, carpet it over, replace with tables and chairs and things that could be easily adapted, and the difference has been night and day in terms of the activities that we can do in the class. It's not like you couldn't have turned around and talked to your classmate before, but like now it's so easy to organize things, put people into groups of whatever size, etc. So I'd be interested, I guess, in thinking about the ways you could vary the ways the ways in which the data is collected in this paper, the ways they analyze it, because it seems to me that they're almost underselling a result here. But it does seem like there's some degree of importance to this. But I do come back to Greg's point that maybe the instructor, the level of experience of the instructor may be an interesting variable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There is something really satisfying about being able to see the faces of people that you're working with.
Yeah.
And looking at the arrangement of student desks in their traditional classroom, because those are arranged in a semicircle, you already have a little bit of that. It's not as bad as just having straight rows where it really is hard to, crank your neck around and look at anybody that's more than one person away from you.
And so again, it's more almost anecdotal, but it seems like there is something like intuitive about that you want to have that ease in setting up groups. And maybe it's not even so much that things work or don't work, but it's how easy is it to do something. If it's more amenable to set up group work or things like that in the class, would you be more likely to do it? That sort of stuff. I guess that's kind of supplement information I think would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think if you are geared up or enjoy doing things in the classroom that only require 2 people to work together, probably doesn't matter at all. 3 people or more, it starts to get easier if they can turn and see each other easily. I think there is something to be said for someone who has experience who can just say, okay, this is the room I've got, so this is the kind of activities and this is the size groups I'm going to use in the space, because sometimes the physical facility kind of trumps all else.
Like it doesn't matter what you're going to do if the room is shaped funny or there's very limited space or things like that.
I have a funny anecdote, but my other half is in genetics, and I get along with all the micro folks, and we're a big teaching faculty community. And the latest discussion has been whether certain people get in the scale-up room here on campus or get what they call the clown room, which apparently there's a room on campus people call the clown room because it's colorful, but it has fixed desks, so you can't really move around. So this faculty member has basically 2 versions of the class: a version for group work intensive and a version for the clown room. And I was like, that is mind-boggling, but I never thought about that. But
and the amount of work you'd have to do, basically 2 complete deviating preps right for the same thing.
It's either worksheets and POGL activities or more clicker-based activities in the more group work. So, and the other thing I was thinking about with this paper, and this is really silly, but we think about the value of mobile desks that they were mentioning, and nowadays Poll Everywhere has made and Top Hat on our campus has made polling really accessible. But the silly thing that I've really enjoyed, and I think no one has caught on, or we're all feigning ignorance around here, but someone left a mobile whiteboard in the classroom, and it's a skinny one. So we have a big one or a bigger one, but someone left a smaller one earlier this semester. And having two whiteboards has changed the way I structure whiteboard use. And I really love using the whiteboard, but now I use the smaller one for just an outline of what we're doing every session. And just today's topic, subtopics, just a couple of topics, and your reminder. And I can go through it and check off what we're doing. And then the bigger, I felt I never got to do that when I only had one whiteboard, because I would always want to write down ideas people were coming up with or different things. So it's really silly, but someone leaving an extra whiteboard has really changed how I've taught in that space this semester. And someone was saying, we should wheel this one back. And I'm like, no, it's ours now, and their loss.
You've grown enamored by it, basically.
Oh yeah, it's like the perfect size. It's not big enough to do brainstorming, but it's good size to write like a list, and then take home, not take home, but reminders for what you should do and where we are in the structure of the lecture.
Huh. You actually make an interesting point as well about the clown room and whatnot, that there are potentially institutional commitments one way or another. Like, do you have the magic room that people can fight over if they want, or is this something that's important enough that you actually change a bunch of rooms? And
right.
That comes down to a lot of the huge issues that we talk about in all of these sessions, and that is what you do versus your colleagues, getting people to buy in for institutional change, that kind of thing. And if you actually had multiple faculty interested in this sort of thing, that the leverage might exist to renovate that room and get things more amenable to group work, active learning, that kind of thing. If you can find the money, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, other thoughts, ideas?
I had a somewhat random, somewhat small question about this paper, but it might be
random is good.
It might be of somewhat general interest in terms of just thinking about test validation. So these authors made a big deal about unidimensionality. They really wanted to have a knowledge assessment that was unidimensional. And I think I know what that means, but beyond that, I couldn't understand why that was such a big deal. Do any of you sort of know if that really is a big deal, or if it's just the author's personal thing? Or so they had this 18-item knowledge test, and then they pared it down to the 8 items whose scores, I guess, basically correlated with each other, right? So they felt like they were measuring some unidimensional understanding. And so they threw out the other 10 questions, at least for some of their analyses. But, to me, naively, my thought is just, well, a good test can measure a few different dimensions of knowledge. If you covered them all in your course, why do you have to be unidimensional? That's where I am with that.
Yeah. I mean, my first
that much was bothered by that. I don't know.
I suppose trying to make sure that you don't have as like, if you see a difference, that you can't attribute it to other variables. I mean, I'm not sure I read that right, honestly. Yeah, and if it's something that between us we're not sort of seeing the main thing, maybe it is a personal preference of trying to eliminate potential other factors, which is not a very satisfying answer, but I mean.
Yeah. I just really quickly ran it by my biostatistician wife, and she said, yeah, don't see why their survey would have to be unidimensional, but she didn't, read the paper.
I have to say that I know so little about statistical approaches that, I'm not sure why
I can't even pretend to have an intelligence.
Single area of focus. I don't know why that would be desirable.
Okay, well, let's leave it there then. But yeah, that was the thing that jumped out at me besides the my previous comments. Oh, and also in terms of my earlier thing about maybe classroom design matters more for the novice instructors, I felt like in some ways maybe this paper was a little bit the opposite of what we're used to, which is that these educational researchers who are really, expert teachers and really motivated to make new things work, they do a study of their new intervention, and them being super skilled, they can make it work and demonstrate an improvement. But then, your average Joe Schmo instructor, when they try and kind of implement that somewhat half-heartedly because they're not as invested in it, they're not as expert, it doesn't necessarily yield the same bang for the buck, right? This is sort of, to me, possibly the opposite, in which you have, an expert active learning instructor, and so for them, maybe that classroom design space doesn't matter as much because they're gonna make it work regardless. But your Joe Schmo instructors might actually benefit more. So that was my
That's a good point.
thought.
Like, who would be the intended audience of the paper in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's we're speculating, of course, beyond their data. All they can say is, well, we did this with these two classes taught by this person. But yeah, lots of room for speculation.
Well, like all of these things involving, human intervention and things like that, what are all the different variables? What are all the different unique situations? You sort of brought one up with a instructor previous experience, but then, all the other questions come to play here as well. Student experience, student level, size of class, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I just thought of was some of the activities that I have used and colleagues of mine have used in active learning classes involves tangible things, like manipulables, things that they have to set out as a strip sequence or maneuver something to basically show relationships between different components. And that sort of thing is just so much easier when you have a whole table to work on. Now, the ones that they show here, it looks like there are screens or monitors in the center, so maybe they don't have that much room to work either. But certainly depending on the types of activities that you think are optimal for students to do, there are times when tables are just terrific. Mm-hmm. The other side of that is, and I think these are becoming common, to have standard kind of theater seating, which actually is in rows, but that has seats that swivel 180 degrees.
Oh.
Maybe they swivel 360, I don't know. So that two people sitting in front can turn around and be face on, be like a bridge table almost. Yeah. It's nice of a card table, and there are four people who are very specifically looking eye to each other, and then there's this desk space between them. And I think those, as a prototype for active learning spaces, are really, really, really useful. And that kind of configuration gets around the problem that using scale-up tables, if you have them spaced enough so people can actually move around without getting claustrophobic or breaking fire codes, active learning classrooms really do often take up more space than anything that has fixed seating. I'm just looking at the diagrams they show in Figure 1, where they're accommodating, I guess, the same number of people, right? Or roughly the same amount. And the active learning classroom clearly is larger. Whereas keeping the rows straight and just having swiveling chairs is a really useful way of getting around that. And you can do that in theaters that hold 1,000 people. I think a lot of this comes down to whatever your facilities management people see as the lifetime of a classroom too.
Oh yeah.
I know here we talk about 30-year lifetimes, and we've got some places that are a lot older than that, and they're pretty tired and in need of update. And sometimes what they'll do, update means new carpeting and new chairs, but the chairs don't have, they're just regular fixed chairs that don't
Nice
move.
furniture, but doesn't really help you with the reform, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Whereas you can take a theater, especially one that's tiered, I mean, trying to turn those into an active learning space, that's very tricky because you've got altitude to take into account. But you can take a tiered theater and still make it more conducive to active learning if you choose the right kind of chairs. It's whether or not the people who make those decisions get any input from faculty or other instructors about what they really want or what would be useful or what would help learning.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you get a seat at the table for those conversations, which more often than not, you probably don't.
Right. Yeah. That's a particular sore point for us right now because there was a new physics building that was supposed to have some active learning classrooms and ended up without any, and there are a couple faculty were just livid about it. So their only input was very early in the design stage, but when things started actually getting put up and finished off, they were nowhere to be heard. Their voice was ignored.
Oh no. So one thing that I've noticed is when we were limited by the physical space of the classroom, which is an obvious, and it was easy to put 35, and I know these numbers in comparison are are really tiny, but it was easy to put 45 in like theater style seating. But with the movable tables and chairs, we're maxing out at 34. And today I every week I joke around how at this time I'm not going to trip over a whiteboard or a backpack, but I try to circulate, and people are moving around between chairs, which is part of the thing. But now you have cables for laptops, you got backpacks. It's a maze, and it's something that has, because one of my goals was to move around and try to visit with all the groups. It's hard getting to the groups in the back, and in retrospect, we never accounted for, when we were redesigning this room, we never thought that yes, it's great to have tables and we can fit six of these tables and each one has 2 components, but we never thought about the spread out and the extra stuff that students bring in. That is with stadium style seating, it's just one after the other and it fits neatly.
Especially if you have tables that really do move, because then you can't have the electrical outlets in the center of the table, and then you do have cords on the floor.
Yes. And that was one thing that someone should have caught, and I certainly didn't, but we needed to put outlets in the middle of the floor and not just in the walls, because you'll see people scoot back and scoot back up.
Yeah.
It seems that regardless of how hard we try, we always forget something when we put these things up.
Yep. Yeah. I actually have a Google Doc of suggestions for if sometime in the future they put us in a different building, if we outgrow, what would be some stuff that would
You're ready for that.
give us plugs, uh,
Mhm.
That's funny.
outlets.
Another useful thing, you mentioned backpacks on the floor. I can't remember where this was, but I visited some place that had chairs that had a little ledge under the seat that
Yeah.
was big enough to hold the backpack. Those are wonderful.
So I saw that at UNC and Delaware. Delaware has a
Mm.
couple of rooms like that, and it's self-contained, so you wheel around your backpack, and it's better than Carlos trying to jump over stuff and lecture. And this year we actually ran into one with that room that our Wednesday section. So that room is in constant use, and and our Wednesday ethics class has a person in a wheelchair,
Hmm.
and
Mhm.
we need more space, and that requires whoever taught on Tuesday evening to arrange or rearrange tables to make room.
Mm.
All right. So I think we've covered this very exhaustively, which is great. And I actually remembered to record this, which is awesome.
Yay.
I will get Thea Clark to post this so other people can see as well. And Sue, just for your own interest, we had, I think, 3 or 4 people at the meeting last week. So
Good.
we're doing decently on these in terms of attendance, which is good.
I really enjoy these.
Oh, glad to hear it. And hopefully we'll see some of you guys at the meeting next month. And we'll certainly be in touch.
Okay, thanks.
All right, till next time.